Party Hits.
Wake up!
Welcome to Bytes on the 6th of August 2015, and we're going to start, we're going to talk about charities, and Mr. O'Nob, as a colleague of mine calls him, that'll be BONO later on. Some stuff I've read before, but some audiences on another network won't have heard some of this stuff, so I'm going to go over that later. But I'm going to follow up on the story we did last week on the police, who were not going to respond to burglaries anymore. Well, now it seems that if you live in Leicestershire, they're only going to respond to your call if you live in an even-numbered house. What's next? This is a Telegraph, August 5th. What's next? Police only investigate the theft of yellow cars. In Leicestershire, the news that the police only respond to your call if you live in an even-numbered house will only encourage criminals. 4 years ago this week, London stood on the brink of civil disorder. Rioters torched buildings, looted shops, overturned cars and rampaged through the streets of the capital. All orchestrated, of course, and used to bring in more draconian laws. When the trouble spread to other towns and cities, the country seemed to be in the grip of summer madness. The rabble was in control. The rabble, yeah, that's the general public, the plebs, as they call us. The phenomenon of the mob, once a commonplace on London streets, had returned. And why? Because the agency responsible for keeping order, the police, had failed to respond swiftly enough when rioting broke out in North London. Their initial unwillingness to intervene robustly and instead allow the looters to carry on unmolested encouraged the belief that they could plunder with impunity. Now, as I said, it was all perfectly orchestrated, and at the time I knew of people who were looking out their windows in London and they could see people orchestrating events on the ground below them. Undercover police officers, agent provocateurs. As a result, it became far more difficult for the police to regain control. And I had pictures and video of things going on there at the time, and it was shown on. I copied them from the television. I've lost them since, but there you go. And it showed you clearly agent provocateurs, undercover police officers going through the crowd and showing ID to people to get behind the police lines. It's, as I say, all orchestrated. It was an object lesson in the importance of taking early action against such matters, while also showing what happens when criminal elements think they can get away with it. This doesn't, that sounds like government, doesn't it? This doesn't just apply to rioting, but also to small-scale theft, as well as low-grade vandalism. The so-called broken windows theory, devised by the American criminologists Wilson and Kelling, makes this point. If you allow a neighbourhood to deteriorate, then the drug pushers, pimps and muggers will soon move in because they think no one will stop them. Well, nobody does. Sooner or later, it becomes a no-go area for decent people and even the police. So what do they join the police for if they're not going to go into these areas? They allow it to happen, obviously. If they're not going to go there, they want it to happen. It's quite obvious. Similarly, if someone thinks they can break into a house without being caught, then they will try their luck. Most burglaries are carried out by a tiny number of offenders who tend to prey on the same communities until they are caught. So how will the Leicestershire criminals respond to news from the country's constabulary that its officers only attended reports of attempted burglaries at even-numbered houses? I thought this was a joke until the force issued a statement confirming that it conducted a 3-month trial in which only half the scenes of attempted break-ins would be visited by forensic officers to assess whether attendance or otherwise had any material impact on either investigative opportunities or victim satisfaction rates. 4 other constabularies are planning to follow Leicestershire's example. What next? Maybe they'll only investigate the theft of yellow cars, or will only bother with street robberies if more than £50 has been stolen. In fact, we have already sold the past year. One-off shop thefts involving goods worth less than £100, it used to be £200, are no longer arrestable offences, but attract fixed penalties of around £60 instead, which I guess the people will just go out and steal. There you go, and that won't be reported, will it? If you're criminally inclined and don't mind risking a financial penalty less than the value of the goods you steal, which are you likely to do? Exactly. You steal £600 worth of stuff and you get a £60 fine. Great, eh? The British Retail Consortium says this approach simply encourages shoplifters. Shop thefts cost retailers some £2 billion a year, which is simply passed on to the law-abiding majority through higher prices. Well, no, it isn't actually, because they're insured for it, and they set aside money for shoplifting. So when they pass on higher prices, that's just an excuse to pass on higher prices regardless. I don't subscribe to the idea that the police should investigate each and every crime. There was a time when individual coppers were trusted to exercise their discretion to admonish minor miscreants, including first-time shoplifters, rather than take them to the police station and spend hours filling out forms. But burglary was always considered serious. To have one's property violated is a traumatic experience. To discover that the police do not take it seriously simply compounds the misery. These days, even if they do investigate, the chances of the burglar being imprisoned are minimal unless he is a serial offender. In the 50s, a burglar was 5 times more likely to go to jail than now, and there were far fewer break-ins. Well, that's because people probably beat the crap out of them if they caught them. No wonder people left their doors unlocked. Today, though, doors are bolted, windows locked, and homes protected by alarms. But they still get to break in, eh? They can still manage to get in. So what good does that do? You as well just leaving the doors open and letting them walk in, because then you don't have to pay for the locks when they smash them. How curious that as we turn our homes into fortresses because there aren't enough officers to deal with such serious crime, the force does manage to rustle up the manpower to investigate journalists for thought crime. Katie Hopkins, a controversialist Sun columnist, was recently questioned by officers from Scotland Yard's preposterously titled Special Inquiry Team of the Homicide and Major Crime Command for something she had written about immigration. If the police don't focus on preventing real crime and keeping order, the mob always stands ready to fill the void. Well, you know, they're acting like communists. Journalists in the Soviet Union weren't allowed to say anything unless it'd been pre-approved, or write anything unless it was pre-approved, and that's the way we're going here, of course. You know, or like, you know, Hitler's fascists. That's the way it's going. But you can get away with it if you're a fat cat banker, can't you? RBS sell-off. Hedge funds investigated for making millions at taxpayers' expense. Well, the RBS made millions at taxpayers' expense when they got bailed out, and the public, the taxpayer, are supposed to own RBS. So did the public have any say in whether it would be sold off or not? Well, of course not, because it was all pre-planned to give it away to their friends. All the bankers stick together with Osborne, Cameron, Blair, all the rest of them, and this is just the same as selling off the power companies and the water companies. It's no different. It's all corrupt, and all pre-planned, of course. Britain's financial watchdog is looking into claims that hedge funds made millions of pounds at the taxpayers' expense by using inside information to short sell shares in Royal Bank of Scotland. And An analysis of RBS share trading reveals there was a sharp rise in the number of shares being shorted, a technique that involves borrowing a stock and then betting it will fall in value, between the bank's interim results last Thursday and the government's 2.1 billion share sale on Monday night. I mean, did the British public get to see any of that money? I doubt it. That'll go into somebody's back pocket in government, and they'll dish it out to their friends to do, community, public-private partnerships, and they'll get all these big fat contracts. It's been alleged that the increase in trading could be a sign that some investors got wind that the government was about to start selling part of its 78% stake in the bank, betting this would drive the share price down. Well, it's not the government share. It's the British public share, which they'll see nothing of. They've just had it taken off them. In the event, RBS shares fell 8% between Thursday and Monday evening. If this resulted in the government getting a lower price for the shares it sold, as would be expected, that would mean hedge fund traders benefited at the taxpayers' expense. It's funny how it's the government shares, but it's the taxpayers' expense, eh? The Financial Conduct Authority confirmed that the case would come under its jurisdiction to assess whether there was any evidence of insider trading. However, a spokesman said they would never directly comment on individual cases. The Treasury Select Committee is also expected to investigate the claims. A spokesman said MPs were expected to take evidence for UK Financial Investments, which was responsible for the sale later this year. He added that the issue of short selling would be addressed. According to data from the financial information company Market, quoted by the Financial Times, RBS shares used for short selling almost doubled to 1.8% at the end of last week, their highest level for several months. The total amount of shares being used to sell RBS short peaked at about 68 million, worth some £238 million. If the short sellers got out of the market on Monday, they would have made around £20 million. One of Osborne's friends, I guess. Possibly. However, Treasury sources said that the companies that handled the government's share placement, including Citigroup, Goldman Sachs and UBS, were only appointed on Monday, hours before the sale started. Yeah, sure they were. The sources added that it would have been possible for informed traders to speculate that the government was about to start offloading its stake in the company following its annual results. So they guessed. They just had a good guess. Hedge funds have been in the past run into trouble with regulators over wall crossing during share sales. This is a process when an investor is judged to possess inside information when they are being marketed a deal by bankers. I guess these guys must live at odd-numbered houses or something, because there's no mention of the police investigating them here either. But I said we were going to talk about charities, and every major charity is corrupt. I don't care what anybody says about it. Every major charity is just a con job and corrupt to the core, with their chief executives getting six-figure salaries and all the rest of it, and fancy cars and trips abroad, on the charity's money. Kids company founder Camilla Batmangeli denies mismanagement after charity goes bankrupt. Well, I read that name out. That's the kind of way it looks like it should be pronounced, but it's Batmangeli. It's like Batman and who's she robbing? Camilla Batmangeli admits charity lived hand-to-mouth existence and took on more cases than it could afford, but says it faced a moral problem. The founder of Kids Company has denied financial mismanagement, despite admitting the charity lived a hand-to-mouth existence and took on more cases than it could afford. Speaking hours after the charity shut down from bankruptcy, the defiant Camilla Batmangeli insisted Kids Company had faced a moral problem after being overwhelmed with very disturbed children it could not turn away. On the charity's final day, she had talked a child out of jumping off a platform in front of a train, she claimed. No evidence of it. The charity's closure on Wednesday night came days after ministers defied concerns of Whitehall over value for money by giving it a £3 million grant to overhaul its management and leadership. Gets £3 million and then shuts down, eh? Kids Company has been rocked by weeks of allegations of poor financial management, prompting Miss Batmangeli to quit as chief executive last month. Well, that'll make a big difference, won't it? I wonder how much loot she got away with. Miss Batmangeli said, "Our problem is not the efficiency of our financial systems, it's our lack of funding." She said, "If we were so dysfunctional, why did the government hand over £7 million worth of taxpayers' money?" Because you've got friends in government, that's why. And they're as corrupt as you are. Well, possibly more so. Speaking on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, it's always BBC Radio 4, isn't it? And the Today programme, she said, "We had not sufficient money for the numbers of children who were coming to our door. It's not about bad management on our part, it's about trying to sort out something that society isn't dealing with." Maybe the government's throwing money at them because they don't want those children going anywhere else and spilling the beans on what's happened to them. Maybe this is hush-hush money from Miss Batmangeli. Miss Batmangeli said she had wanted the government to come and take responsibility for child protection and child mental health cases that a charity like ours shouldn't be holding. So she was taking money under false pretences then. I thought that was a crime. She defended taking on cases the charity was not equipped to deal with, saying, "Children and young people are self-referring off the street. They are pouring through our doors with very serious issues. It's a moral problem," she said. David Cameron has been accused of propping up the charity with public money because he was mesmerised by Miss Batman-Gelly, a charismatic figure who was seen to embody the Conservatives' big society aims. That's all in together, eh? Dominic Cummings, a former advisor to Michael Gove at the Department for Education and a critic of David Cameron, has claimed the Prime Minister told education officials they should give KC what they want. So I guess if they'd asked for 10 million, they'd got it. Tim Loughton, the former Children's Minister, has also said he raised serious concerns about more funding being ploughed into the charity. But Miss Batman-Gelly said objective facts showed it had passed every audit for the last 19 years without trouble. Well, that's better than the European Union, I guess. They've not passed one audit in 19 years. And without trouble, and central government had never once written to her to suggest the company was not properly run in any way. Reports suggest the company went bankrupt after donors withdrew funding when it emerged the charity was facing a police investigation over child protection issues. I wonder what they were up to, eh? Taking children in and there's a police investigation now. I wonder what they were doing with those children. I don't think it's hard to imagine, do you? The most recent £3 million funding was awarded by the Cabinet Office despite concerns raised by Richard Heaton, the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary, who took the step of requiring a written direct order from ministers before agreeing to the lifeline. Cabinet Office Ministers Oliver Letwin and Matthew Hancock said they were very mindful of the inspirational work that Kids Company does and decided to release the funding anyway, even although they were under police investigation over child protection issues. Maybe they just needed the money for a good lawyer. The grant was paid only on the condition that Miss Batman-Gelly agreed to step down as part of a reorganisation. Well, big deal, eh? Ministers may now try to claw some of the £3 million back because the charity allegedly breached the terms of the grant by using £800,000 of it on wages. Not bad, eh? Six-figure sums for wages. Miss Batman-Gelly on Wednesday railed against rumour-mongering civil servants and ill-spirited ministers for forcing the charity to close and abandon a lot of children. Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, said he was a huge fan of Camilla and of Kids Company. He said, "Clearly there have been questions raised about some of the financial management of the organisation, which I don't think is in any way a reflection on the idealism and the motivations of Camilla Batman-Gelly, the people who support Kids Company, the volunteers who go in there and do great stuff for kids. No, it's just fraud, Boris," which you're well aware of. Alan Yentob, the BBC creative director who is also chairman of the charity. That's funny, a BBC creative director's chairman of a children's charity. Eh? What's that about? Faced calls to consider his position. Yeah, get off that little boy, Mr. Yentob. Might be appropriate. Mr. Yentob allegedly tried to influence the direction of a BBC expose, according to one newspaper. Andrew Brigden, a Tory MP, said he has a conflict of interest. It doesn't reflect well on him. The BBC said Mr. Yentob had no editorial control over news programmes. A spokesman said the fact that the BBC broke this story shows that our journalism has been impartial and in the public interest. I'll just repeat that for those who have just fallen off their chair laughing. The fact that the BBC broke this story shows that our journalism has been impartial and in the public interest. Since when? Since when? Eh? But it doesn't stop there. This is back in April 2010. Taxpayers' money given to corrupt charities. The government department in charge of Britain's £5.6 billion aid budget has been accused of unjustifiable secrecy because it is refusing to disclose the names of charities and developing countries found to have fraudulently obtained money donated on behalf of UK taxpayers. The figures obtained by the Independent under the Freedom of Information Act show that the Department for International Development has lost nearly £720,000 over the past 5 years as a result of fraud, corruption and abuse by governments in the developing world or NGOs using British funds. I'd say that's a drop in the bucket to what they've lost out of 5.6 billion. They've lost a lot more than that, and they've given it. And this, what about the? It's an interesting use of terms, isn't it? They've lost it. What about the stuff they've knowingly given to corrupt people who've still got it, which they haven't lost? You know, probably another 4.9 billion. Probably that. But DFID has refused to release a detailed list of the projects and countries where fraud has been uncovered, saying that to do so would jeopardise the UK's relationship with foreign governments and risk further abuse by detailing the nature of the offence. And it has also refused to give details of exactly how much money has been misused. So here's the government hiding taxpayers' money. And they won't tell you where it's gone. So they've stolen it. They've stolen it. Maybe it didn't go anywhere except in politicians' back pockets. You know, maybe they can't tell you because nobody got it except themselves. The decision to protect the identity of corrupt charities and governments was greeted with anger by campaigners and opposition politicians, who said the policy ran contrary to pledges of transparency in the aid system and risked undermining public confidence in Britain's strong stance on supporting the developing world. And all those opposition politicians won't say a word if they ever get into power, will they? Not at all, because they'll be doing the same thing. Maurice Frankel, director of the Campaign for Freedom of Information, said, "This is information that should be unquestionably put in the public domain. In the context of DFID's overall budget, these are the sort of sums that would have been misappropriated by junior officials or an NGO, and it is difficult to see how disclosure would be capable of harming international relations. It may well be true that the details of certain claims cannot be disclosed, in particular if they relate to as yet unproven allegations, but to insist on blanket anonymity smacks of unjustifiable secrecy." Well, they'll have a secretary to cover that up, won't they? DFID took 5 months to reply to the FOI request from the Independent for details of anti-corruption investigations conducted by its counter-fraud unit. Well, that's a crime in itself, that they took 5 months to reply. But it said it had recovered, via investigations, £719,000 since 2005 relating to budgetary support or direct funding of developing world governments and money supplied to charities, including thousands of local NGOs. The department said that the list of identifiable specific fraud cases was being withheld to protect Britain's good working relationships with foreign governments and international organisations. In other words, lunatics running third world countries. That's who they don't want to tell you about. In its FOI response, DFID said disclosing sensitive information related to them would be likely to damage these relationships, harm DFID's ability to work with and influence other donors in eradicating poverty, and undermine the UK's ability to respond to international development needs. What a joke. Well, try dealing with poverty in your own country, Mr Cameron. And how about helping Greece out, maybe? The department has adopted a robust stance on investigating allegations of fraud or corruption. Really. In December last year, the government announced it had frozen funding to the Ministry of Education in Kenya and issued visa bans against 20 Kenyan officials after $1.3 million, £850,000, to buy learning materials went missing. That's a lot of money for learning materials, isn't it? The Nigerian authorities, didn't they get a hint there was something wrong there? The Nigerian authorities are also trying to trace £165,000 of DFID funding for training teachers, which has disappeared. Over the past 3 years, DFID has also given funding of £4.7 million to specialist units in the City of London and the Metropolitan Police Forces dedicated to investigating fraud. And that's gone missing. Scotland Yard's Proceeds of Corruption Unit has seized or frozen assets of more than £140 million since 2006, but DFID said it was not aware that any of the recoveries or seizures by the two police forces included money that it had donated abroad. Andrew Mitchell, the Conservative spokesman on international development, told The Independent that while the naming and shaming of foreign governments or charities found to have acted fraudulently should be considered on a case-by-case basis, there was no justification for blanket anonymity. He said taxpayers will be rightly angered that their money appears to have been misspent. No, it's been given away to criminals. Or it's just simply disappeared, and you can't tell us who you gave it to. Misspent. A DFID spokesman said, "We do not tolerate corruption and actively pursue those who misuse resources meant for the poor. Every one of DFID's programmes is subject to rigorous safeguards and careful monitoring to minimise the risk of fraud or misuse of UK funds." Well, they're not UK funds, they're taxpayers' funds. DFID's counter-fraud unit has recovered £719,000 relating to budgetary support or NGO funding over the past 5 years, which is a clear signal of DFID's commitment to fighting fraud and corruption wherever we find it. They want to start with the British government. Start at your own front door. British funding lost through fraud, corruption and abuse by governments in the developing countries on the and NGOs amounted to 720,000, which they keep repeating, but they don't as I say, they don't mention the other 4.9 billion. Where did that go? They're not going to tell you that either. But here's one charity that's back in September 2010 was caught, and it's Bono's charity, Bono of U2, who at the time I think was worth £400 million himself. But this is what this sleazebag piece of trash was up to. Bono's One Foundation under fire for giving little over 1% of funds to charity. Bono's Anti-Poverty Foundation 1 is under pressure to explain its finances after it was revealed that only a small percentage of money it raises reaches the needy. It's just the same as the government, isn't it? Because he's following the same programme and he's all in with them. And he's probably getting money from the government as well. Part of that 4.9 billion that they don't seem to want to tell anybody where it went. The non-profit organisation, yeah, sure. Set up by the U2 frontman, yeah, he's a frontman alright, but it's not for U2, received almost £9.6 million in donations in 2008, but handed out only £118,000 to good causes, 1.2%. The figures published by the New York Post also show that £5.1 million went towards paying salaries. That's, nothing's too good for this guy, is it? I wonder how much he got. While the organisation's game plan has never been direct handouts on the ground, many who admire the Irish rock legend may be surprised by the figures. Well, I'm not, and I don't admire them. Bono was playing Brussels last night with U2 as the world's leaders, but so many of whom he speaks to directly were meeting at the UN Assembly in New York to assess the progress or lack of in reaching the Millennium Goals they set. What's that? Starving Africa to death. The Post revealed it had received a number of gifts from One in the run-up to the event, such as leather notebooks, bags of coffee and water bottles. Cheapskate, eh? In the UK, the organisation has laid on a series of high-profile celebrity-supported events since it launched in 2002 to fight poverty in Africa and AIDS worldwide. And that's why he's all in with Bill Gates and his vaccine programme, killing people. That's how they're solving poverty. They're just killing people off. In 2009, the group campaigned to have enshrined in British law a commitment to development assistance abroad. One spokesman, Oliver Buston, has now defended the way the organisation is run, insisting the money is used for promoting its campaign and raising awareness rather than being given straight to those who need help. So they spend it on advertising while people starve to death. What do? They take down the old posters and let them eat paper when they're finished with them. Is that it? He said, "We don't provide programmes on the ground. We are an advocacy and campaigning organisation." Another spokesman in New York today dismissed the notion of lavish salaries being paid to its 120 members of staff and said the organisation was highly efficient in its raising of awareness. It spent £5.1 million on salaries for 120 people. That's not bad, is it? One said it took no money from the public and that most of its funding came from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But here's an article from 2013. September again, from a site called Hang the Bankers. Bono exposed as a complete fraud. Bono's positioning of the West as the saviour of Africa while failing to discuss the harm the G8 nations are doing has undermined campaigns for justice and accountability. It was bad enough in 2005. Then at the G8 summit in Scotland, Bono and Bob Geldof, another piece of trash, heaped praise on Tony Blair and George Bush, who were still mired in the butchery they had initiated in Iraq. At one point, Geldof appeared, literally and figuratively, to be sitting in Tony Blair's lap. African activists accused him of drowning out a campaign for global justice and a campaign for charity. But this is worse, as the UK chairs the G8 summit again, a campaign that Bono founded, with which Geldof works closely, appears to be whitewashing the G8's policies in Africa. And it should also be noted that Geldof decided to have his Live 8 concert on the same day that 1 million people marched through the streets of Edinburgh protesting against the Iran-Iraq war. You should watch Starsuckers, the documentary on that, and it exposes that piece of garbage for what he is, him and Bono. Last week I drew attention to the new Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, launched in the US when it chaired the G8 meeting last year. The alliance is pushing African countries into agreements that allow foreign companies to grab their land, patent their seeds and monopolise their food markets. Ignoring the voices of their own people, 6 African governments have struck deals with companies such as Monsanto, Cargill, DuPont, Syngenta, Nestle and Unilever in return for promises of aid by the UK and other G8 nations. A wide range of activists, both African and European, is furious about the new alliance, but the One campaign, co-founded by Bono, stepped up to defend it. The article it wrote last week was remarkable in several respects, in its elision of the interests of African leaders and those of the people, in its exaggeration of the role of small African companies, but above all in failing even to mention the injustice at the heart of the new alliance, its promotion of a new wave of land grabbing. My curiosity was piqued. The first thing I discovered is that Bono has also praised the new alliance in a speech just before last year's G8 summit in the US. The second thing I discovered is that much of the One campaign's primary funding was provided by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, two of whose executives sit on its board. The foundation has been working with the biotech company Monsanto and the grain trading giant Cargill, and has a large Monsanto shareholding. Bill Gates has responded to claims made about land grabbing in Africa, asserting, in the face of devastating evidence and massive resistance from African farmers, that many of those land deals are beneficial, and it would be too bad if some were held back because of Western groups' way of looking at things. Africans, you will note, keep getting written out of this story. And there's Bill Gates justifying land grabbing, or theft, of people's property. The third thing I discovered is that there's a long history here. In his brilliant and blistering book The Frontman, BONO, In the Name of Power, just released in the UK, the Irish scholar Harry Brown maintains that for nearly 3 decades as a public figure, BONO has been amplifying elite discourses, advocating ineffective solutions, patronising the poor and kissing the arses of the rich and powerful. His approach to Africa is a slick mix of traditional missionary and commercial colonialism, in which the poor world exists as a task for the rich world to complete. Well, that's exactly what it is. Bono, Brown charges, has become the caring face of global technocracy, who without any kind of mandate has assumed the role of spokesperson for Africa, then used that role to provide humanitarian cover for Western leaders. His positioning of the West as a saviour of Africa, while failing to discuss the harm the G8 nations are doing, has undermined campaigns for justice and accountability, while lending legitimacy to the neoliberal project. And here he is hanging out with royalty. Bono claims to be representing the poorest and most vulnerable people, but talking to a wide range of activists from both the poor and rich worlds since One published its article last week, I have heard the same complaint again and again, that Bono and others like him have seized the political space which might otherwise have been occupied by the Africans about whom they are talking. Because Bono is seen by world leaders as a representative of the poor are not invited to speak. This works very well for everyone except them. The One campaign looks to me like the sort of organisation that John le Carré or Robert Harris might have invented. It claims to work on behalf of the extremely poor, but its board is largely composed of multimillionaires, corporate aristocrats and US enforcers. Here you will find Condoleezza Rice, George W. Bush's National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, who aggressively promoted the Iraq War, instructed the CIA that it was authorised to use torture techniques, and browbeat lesser nations into supporting a wide range of US aims. Here too is Larry Summers, who was chief economist at the World Bank during the darkest days of structural adjustment, and who as US Treasury Secretary helped to deregulate Wall Street with such happy consequences for the rest of us. Here's Howard Buffett, who has served on the boards of the global grain giant Archer Daniels Midland, as well as Coca-Cola, and food corporations ConAgra and Agrotech. Though the main focus of One is Africa, there are only 2 African members. One is a mobile phone baron, the other is the finance minister of Nigeria, who was formerly managing director of the World Bank. What better representatives of the extremely poor could there be? As Bono and his bandmates took to the pyramid stage, activists from direct action group Art Uncut inflated a 20-foot balloon emblazoned with the message, "You pay your tax too," exposing U2's offshore tax avoidance. If, as one does, an organisation keeps telling you that it's a grassroots campaign, it's a fair bet that is nothing of the kind. This collaboration of multimillionaires and technocrats looks to me more like a projection of US and corporate power. I found the site of Bono last week calling for more progress on transparency equally revolting. As Harry Brown reminds us, U2's complex web of companies, the financial arrangements of Bono's Product Red campaign, and his investments through the private equity company he co-founded are all famously opaque. And it's not an overwhelming shock to discover that tax justice is absent from the global issues identified by One. There's a well-known, if dubious, story that claims that at a concert in Glasgow, Bono began a slow hand clap. He is supposed to have announced, "Every time I clap my hands, a child in Africa dies," whereupon someone in the audience shouted, "Well, fucking stop doing it then. It's good advice, and I wish he'd take it." And here's another article on Bono and his hypocrisy, and his greed, and his ego, I guess. This is from FinFacts Ireland, and again it's September 2013. Bono's hypocrisy on Africa, corporate tax avoidance in Ireland. Bono's hypocrisy on Africa and corporate tax avoidance in Ireland has been starkly exposed at a time when the Dutch government has proposed to reform the tax haven company letterbox system used by not only rock groups such as U2 and the Rolling Stones, but 23,000 other entities that, for example, surreptitiously hide trillions of dollars worth of transactions annually related to regions such as Africa. I wonder if the British government is using this crowd to hide the money they've given away to people over there that they won't tell you about. The Netherlands has also proposed to renegotiate tax treaties with 23 low-income countries in order that anti-abuse provisions be included in new treaties. Multinational companies routed €10.2 trillion in 2010 through 14,300 Dutch special financial units, according to the Dutch Central Bank. Bono, the U2 frontman and anti-poverty campaigner, is reported by the Irish Times to have defended Ireland's tax system and the use of Irish companies by multinational giants to reduce their global tax bills, saying that the country was very pleased to compete on that front. At the annual meeting in New York of the Clinton Global Initiative, he's hanging out with all the crooks, isn't he? The Clinton family's philanthropy for developing world projects, Bono interrupted Mo Ibrahim, the Sudanese telecoms billionaire, who during a discussion on Africa referred to Ireland as an example of how the global taxation system was broken. U2 for 20 years availed of a 1960s-era income tax exemption that was introduced to aid indigent artists, and in 2006, in response to the ceiling on its tax-free status, the rock group moved its primary money-making unit to the Netherlands. Paul McGuinness, the manager of the group, said at the time that Bono and U2 continue to remain Ireland-based and are personal investors and employers in the country, but they don't pay any taxes. They don't pay any taxes whatsoever. So how are they invested in the country? Exactly. And they're employers as well, apparently. Innovative tax policies have been a bedrock of Ireland's current prosperity, he added, and look what happened to it. Like any other business, U2 operates in a tax-efficient manner to them, but screw everybody else. Last weekend, Bono claimed that U2's tax strategy was consistent with Ireland's tax competitiveness policy. U2 is in total harmony with our government's philosophy. I'm sure they are. He told the Observer newspaper, tax competitiveness has taken our country out of poverty. Well, you ain't taking anybody out of poverty. The revenue accept that if you engage in that policy, then some people are going to go out and some people are coming in. He added, at the heart of the Irish economy has always been the philosophy of tax competitiveness. On the cranky left, that is very annoying, I can see that, but that is why Ireland has stayed afloat. So I guess he's a right-winger. I guess a bit of a fascist, is he? The Irish Times reports that President Clinton asked a panel group in New York on Tuesday that included Bono how big companies such as Google could best use their money in African communities, probably by spying on them all. Mr. Ibrahim said in an impassioned plea that big companies should pay taxes in Africa. All those big companies don't pay taxes in Africa. That is just not acceptable, he said. People need to stand on that issue. Frankly, the whole taxation system around the world is really broken because businesses have gone global, but our taxation system is still country-based, and then countries compete. So then they just want a global tax system, obviously, and it'll be high taxes for the poor and no taxes for the wealthy, like Bono and Clinton and all the rest of those criminals. At the heart of Bono's hypocrisy in New York was his criticism of extra-active companies, including ExxonMobil, the oil major, for opposing US transparency laws aimed at forcing companies to report how much they pay African states on oil, gas and mining projects to encourage the proper flow of wealth to citizens in those countries. These companies use the same Dutch schemes that enable Bono escaping paying tax on about 95% of his income. The Guardian reported in 2011 that a report by tax campaign group Publish What You Pay Norway found that more than a third of the subsidiaries owned by major energy and mining companies, including Shell, BP and Glencore, were based in secrecy jurisdictions where company accounts are not publicly available. Well, they should all be available if they get government money. Simple as that. Not government money, taxpayers' money, sorry. The report singled out the Netherlands as the second favourite home for extra-active industry companies, a tag justified by the authors on the grounds that the country does not put details of trusts on public record, require company accounts or beneficial ownership to be publicly available, nor maintain company ownership details in official records. So they just get away with everything. The Irish Independent reported on Tuesday that Richard Bruton, Jobs Minister, refused to comment on U2's tax affairs. Well, of course they did. Suffice to say, Ireland has a transparent tax code that applies universally, and it is kosher in terms of the way it's structured. What does that mean? It's Jewish? He said, I am not going to comment on individual companies or their tax affairs. What about individuals? I'm sure if it was you or I, listeners, I'm sure they'd be commenting on our tax affairs if we'd avoided paying it on 95% of our income. Mind you, my income's zero, so 95% of zero is still zero. This claim is dependent on what the term transparent means. My common sense definition suggests that the claim is false. While the revenue has been tracking down personal offshore accounts for more than 20 years, nobody was aware of massive corporate tax avoidance. Nobody at the revenue ever queried multi-billion-dollar charges from places like Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. Apple last week filed accounts with the Irish Companies Office in 2005. Intel and Pfizer do not publish accounts in Ireland, as they are branch operations of Cayman Islands and Dutch firms. Of course, the Minister knows that the unseen corporate tax avoidance was an example of what the Irish used to call Buder Ulera, the deaf ear or blind eye. And it's true, it's very true. In Ireland, people still think that these politicians who swindle them out of their money are great chaps for being able to get away with it. They think, oh, fair play to them. Wish I could do it. Well, you can't do it. Try it. As for Bono, he surely knows that he inhabits the credibility gap between being an international rich man who lives in many places but pays little in taxes, while also being an anti-poverty campaigner. And behind those shades, it must hurt to have to defend massive tax avoidance by big Western companies in response to a plea for fairness for Africa from a successful African businessman. Well, he wears those glasses so he can't look people in the eye because he's a fucking liar. That's why he wears them. And he gets them made in China as well, in sweatshops, along with all this other paraphernalia. This is the Mail Online going back to 2006. Saint Bono the Hypocrite. Cozying up to jailed tycoons and paying as little tax as possible. How U2's frontman built a £1 billion business empire while bullying the rest of us to make poverty history. For the band of super-rich money men in corporate suits, the highlight of an impossibly glitzy birthday party being staged at the San Francisco Zoo was an impromptu guitar jam session. After members of the assembled throng had strummed tunelessly through a series of Beatles numbers, the room fell silent as one guest, bedecked with his trademark oversized sunglasses, began to serenade the evening's multi-millionaire host with a song he had written specially for the occasion. How nice of him. For Bono, one of the biggest rock stars in the world, it was not a typical gig, particularly as one member of the soiree's impoverished backing band was a one-time jailed financier embroiled in an infamous shares scandal. But then the U2 frontman and self-styled saviour of the third world has been keeping some decidedly unusual company these days. Witness, for example, his decision this week to buy a major share in Forbes magazine, that Bible of capitalism and scourge of the liberal left. And he's right-wing, of course. None of which is very rock and roll, and all rather at odds, one would think, with his image as campaigning activist and anti-poverty hero, especially given his recent highly controversial decision to relocate U2's business empire to Holland to avoid paying tax. It's not surprising that the formerly feted star is finding himself increasingly under attack, even from his own fans, amid accusations of hypocrisy. Well, don't buy his trash that he calls music. So just what has happened to Saint Bono? Well, he never was a saint. His transformation, according to those who know him, is all part of the 46-year-old star's plan to move away from performing and into the worlds of high finance and politics. Well, that was always the idea, wasn't it? For behind Bono's working-class, man-of-the-people facade lies someone whose love of money is matched only by his obsession with making even more of it. To that end, the Irish-born singer has quietly established a private equity fund to invest more than £1 billion in a series of money-making ventures. He ain't giving £1 billion to the poor people in Africa, is he? Not even from his charity. 1% he gives. Virtually nothing. £118,000. And yet he's willing to invest £1 billion in money-making ventures for himself. What a creeper. He set up Elevation Partners, named after a U2 song, last year with 5 former senior figures from the world of business, including the former chief financial officer of Apple Computers. Experts predict the venture could double Bono's personal fortune of £400 million in the next 10 years. Now, this was written in 2006, so I guess he's on £800 million now. Eh? He has a property portfolio that includes a villa in the south of France and a lavish Italian-style palazzo overlooking the sea near Dublin, not to mention the £15 million penthouse on Manhattan's Upper West Side he bought from Apple boss Steve Jobs. The apartment, which takes up 2 floors of 27-storey north tower of the ultra-exclusive San Remo building, is listed as one of New York's top 40 properties and boasts 12-foot nickel and bronze doors and floor-to-ceiling windows costing £40,000 each. The building, which is also home to Steven Spielberg, is also so select that its management committee once blackballed Madonna's attempts to move in. Having said that, those who have visited describe Bono's apartment with its avant-garde stone walls and floors as charmless and stark. Well, like him really. Despite its huge sun terrace with stunning views of Central Park, one visitor commented it has absolutely no warmth. Again, just like him. Meanwhile, on top of his own lavish property in the upmarket Kilkenny district of Dublin, which he shares with his wife of 24 years, Ali, and their children, daughters Jordan, 17 and Eve, 15, and sons Elijah, 7, 6-year-old John. The shrewd star paid £3 million 2 years ago for his neighbour's house and linked the two with a corridor. He had no trouble getting planning permission for that, did he? Bono, whose real name is Paul Hewson, also counts a family-sized Maserati among his fleet of luxury cars and is known for his taste of fine food. Well, that's why he's fat. He is also a noted wine connoisseur who will regularly spend thousands on a single bottle at his favourite New York restaurants. He and 3 other members of U2, Adam Clayton, Larry Mullion and guitarist David "The Edge" Evans, have also invested in Vertigo 3, an Airbus A320 to fly them around in style on their current world tour. It's so much for global warming, Bono, eh? On board is the singer's own full-time priest and personal spiritual advisor, Father Jack, who travels everywhere with him. It's a Father Jack and Father Ted, the TV series, comedy TV series. I doubt Bono's got I wonder what kind of priest this guy is and what church he's from. Eh? Satan. All this from someone who, with Bob Geldof, was the prime mover behind last year's Live 8 concerts and personally lobbied Western leaders to secure a $50 billion aid package for the world's poorest countries. Of course, no one can begrudge Bono the wealth he has made. What does leave him open to those accusations of hypocrisy is U2's decision, announced this week, to move part of its multi-million-pound operation. The band is the world's most profitable, earning £141 million last year, from Ireland to Amsterdam after the Irish government announced it was reforming its famously lenient tax laws for artists. But then the group, and particularly its charismatic leader, are well known in the industry for their astute business sense. Well, he's got advisors for that. Their empire, run by financial arm Principal Management, is made up of a myriad of interlinked companies designed to minimise the amount of tax the band members pay. Unlike most musicians, the bandmates still control the lucrative rights to all their own music. Bono, meanwhile, has sought tirelessly to make contacts in the world of venture capital. One of these is Roger McNamee, with whom he now runs Elevation Partners. McNamee, a long-haired, geeky 50-year-old part-time musician who drives a humble Toyota Camry, is famed as one of the smartest deal-makers in California's Silicon Valley, with a personal fortune estimated to be more than $100 million. Well, Bono's got more than him. He is said to have spotted the singer's head for business and his potential for helping the fledgling company open doors into entertainment and the media. I think he means his head for greed. Elevation has already invested more than £200 million in merging two computer games firms, and last year made a bid for Eidos, the makers of Lara Croft Tomb Raider. All high-powered stuff, and sources in America told the Mail this week that the star is now interested in buying a stake in the large US newspaper group Knight Ridder to add to his well-publicised bid for BMG Publishing, which owns the song rights to Coldplay and Christina Aguilera. But it is 40% buyout of Forbes, which cost close to £160 million, that has catapulted Bono into the big lead of corporate finance. The 89-year-old, what was I going to say there? Decapitated would be there, rather than catapulted. The 89-year-old magazine, described as the ultimate mouthpiece of capitalism, is known for its lists of everything from the 100 richest people to the most expensive homes. In the current edition, U2 come in at number 4 in the roll call of the world's richest celebrities. Celebrities, what are they celebrating? It's some idiot with yellow sunglasses on. Former US presidential candidate Stephen Forbes, who's editor-in-chief and whose family stands to make a huge profit from the deal, let slip this week that Bono was already an avid reader of the magazine, news that will hardly help his write-on credentials. He's probably in it, seeing his ego's boosted every time he sees his mug on the front page or the back page or whatever it is. Nor will that jamming session with a scandal hit businessman who was a fellow guest at the San Francisco party thrown from Roger McNamee's birthday 2 months ago. Former New York investment banker Frank Quattrone, 50, who, like McNamee, is a would-be rocker, was jailed 2 years ago for his part in an alleged cover-up during a government investigation into the sale of millions of dollars of shares. The former Credit Suisse banker, who earned upwards of £75 million a year, was given an 18-month sentence but appealed against it, and in March his conviction was overturned. Later this month he will learn whether he must face a retrial. He's earning £75 million a year and he's still got to steal more. That's the kind of people we're talking about here, and Bono's no different. He's a scumbag. It is Bono's involvement with such people that has raised alarm bells at his record company Interscope, who fear it could damage his everyman reputation. When did he get that? Their concerns come at the same time as rumours that he's considering scaling back his music career and moving into politics, as well as tensions with his bandmates over his constant round of jet-hopping diplomacy. One Interscope executive told the Mail, Bono is about as cool as a person gets. He's cold, alright. But that's why his fans absolutely adore him. Apart from the ones that are complaining about his hypocrisy, I guess. Though he has never had to become involved in the worlds of politics and finance because of his charity work and his career, he has always somehow managed to remain above it. He has been acutely aware that if his image becomes more about his money than his talent, he will be very damaged in the eyes of the people who buy his records. Well, he's only got one of those, and it's definitely the money. I don't see any talent in him at all. That's why I just can't understand him buying into Forbes. It is just wrong for his image, and on the surface sends out a terrible message that U2 are just like the rest. That and all the details of the band's tax rates becoming public is really worrying, because I think it could turn people against them, which would be a disaster because Bono has done some truly wonderful things, not only in music but with his campaigning. Yeah, right. Who's this sleazebag complimenting this creep? There's no doubt that Bono and Elevation plan to be big players, US financial journalist Matt Marshall told the Mail. I know Roger McNamee very well, and he is one of the most astute people in Silicon Valley. But don't think Bono is just there for his name. I was speaking recently to a senior executive from Hewlett-Packard who has done business with Bono, and she told me he is the real deal and incredibly focused, all of which will no doubt help him and add to his already massive bank balance, but will it also result in Saint Bono losing his halo? But of course in 2002, he's all on about global warming and stuff, of course. But Bono wants to be high-flying rock star by paying £15 million for a Boeing 747 jumbo jet. The US frontman has been secretly shopping for his personal aircraft so he can travel the world in style. He's clocked up scores of thousands of miles in the past year after frequent visits to Africa and America on political campaigns, so now he thinks his own aircraft would be a sound investment. A source close to the star revealed he has been talking with a few people about getting a plane. Lots of people have their own small private jets, but only stars like Michael Jackson and the Rolling Stones have gone all the way and got a jumbo. Well, I've no much time for them either, but I didn't hear them preaching about global warming and feeding Africa. He won't be buying the whole jet with his own money, so he's buying the whole jet with somebody else's money, is he? There are a couple of businessmen who are interested in having a share. They would basically share it between them and use it whenever they need to fly off somewhere. U2 enjoyed the most successful year ever in 2001 with a record-breaking Elevation World Tour, but Bono, 42, rarely got back home to Dublin. The death of his father Bob in August 2001 and missing his family caused him stress. Well, Bono gets stressed. Poor guy. What about all those people he's not feeding in Africa? They get a bit more than strength. They get death and starvation. Malnutrition. Flies eating out of children's eyes. That's stress. Now he believes that owning a share in a jumbo will help him return home more often and also allow U2 to include far more countries on tour. That's what it's about, see, making more money. The source added, this will mean they can go and play a gig at relatively short notice, even if all the travel arrangements haven't been made. It would also be helpful to Bono, who is still campaigning around the world to end third world debt. He hasn't paid up and bought the jet, but if he decides to go for it, then he should have it by Christmas. Last year, U2 were in a different city almost every day for 10 months. I wonder how much cocaine they snorted up their nose in that time. But only got about 8 minutes left, but I wanted to read this. I talked about Edward Heath last week, but here's The Guardian. Yesterday, a guy called Simon Jenkins being an apologist for Edward Heath, defending paedophilia, basically. But that shouldn't come as any surprise to somebody who knows anything about The Guardian. They do have, I think it's Victoria Corrin and Charlie Skelton, who are admitted hardcore pornographers and writers for The Guardian. That's the kind of staff that The Guardian employ. So it should come as no surprise that this guy Simon Jenkins is defending paedophilia. How easy is it to convict the dead and defenceless? Well, Jimmy Savile, Cyril Smith, they weren't defenceless. They weren't innocent, were they? How about prosecuting them when they're alive? And then they can defend themselves. How about that, Simon Jenkins? The case against Edward Heath looks flimsy, but already the gutter is being dredged for lurid, unsubstantiated claims. That's it then, Sir Edward Heath was a paedophile. It's been on the news for 4 days, so it must be true. They might just be allegations, but we know there is no smoke without fire. The chap was a confirmed bachelor, nudge nudge. They're always a bit fishy, these lonely sorts. So us, the people in alternative media who knew Heath was a paedophile a long, long time ago, and good friends with Jimmy Savile, and as I mentioned last week, allegedly Savile was procuring children from him, and they were thrown off Edward Heath's private yacht when they were finished with him down in Jersey. I suppose many people just shrug and say public figures must take the rough with the smooth, even when they are dead and defenceless, but the current police obsession with historical celebrity sex abuse is beyond bizarre. Oh, he's a celebrity now, is he? I thought he was Prime Minister. By any standard, it risks rampant injustice. Investigation into Edward Heath child abuse claims are to go national. Nationally coordinated police inquiry is to be set up by the end of the week, as former brothel keeper denies knowledge of any misconduct by former PM. The Heath story is underpinned not by what used to be called evidence, but by a deluge of vague and anonymous claims. Each day another police force climbs onto the bandwagon by following allegations said to be pouring in. They are never enumerated, dated or specified. Well, it's the same as the government giving money out to corrupt governments and people, isn't it? They're never enumerated, dated or specified either. As far as Heath is concerned, there appears to be only 2 firm allegations. One comes from a man who says he was raped by Heath in 1961 in a flat in Park Lane full of sailing paraphernalia. Heath had no such flat and was not a sailor then, according to his biographer John Campbell. Well, the biographer ain't going to put that in, is he? The Daily Mirror printed an immaculately written letter from the unnamed man, now in his 60s. The Metropolitan Police investigated it some weeks ago and said it offered no lines of inquiry that could proportionally be followed up. That seems a not unreasonable response. The other is from an anonymous former policeman in Wiltshire who alleged that a Myra Ford had in the mid-1990s threatened to expose Heath as a paedophile if she was prosecuted for running a brothel, back in the 1990s. She denied the whole story on Wednesday, which perhaps explains why Wiltshire's police and prosecutors said they were never told of the threat, although they nevertheless held a press conference outside Heath's former home in Salisbury last weekend. I wonder why she's withdrawn it now. I wonder who's gotten to her. Even before the woman's denial, this seems a very thin basis on which to destroy a man's reputation. His reputation, that's a guy who campaigned to be Prime Minister, swearing that he would never ever join the European Union, and the first thing he did when he got in was sign up to the European Union. So I wonder what dirt they had on him. Yet the gutter has been dredged. Care homes in Jersey and Northern Ireland are said to be investigating claims of Heath making yacht visits to abscond with children. Police operations with fancy names such as Midland and Whistle embrace Heath. One has to wonder if it's not to validate what has become a booming cottage industry. It's a cottage industry reporting paedophilia now. I was one of many political journalists entertained by Heath after his fall. How did he entertain you, I wonder? Gatherings in Salisbury and at party conferences were intriguing rather than jovial. Few women were present. Our assumption was that Heath was gay, though with no evidence. Well, there he goes. He's making an assumption. He's talking about evidence, and he's making an assumption, whilst he's complaining that people are making allegations. Hypocrite. Nor was there any rumour of his association with the known Dolphin Square set and the late Sir Peter Morrison. Had there been, the gossip would have been electric. The topic of Heath's sex life consumes 4 pages of Campbell's excellent biography of the man, drawing a plausible blank. Those close to Heath have expressed dismay and astonishment at the latest witch hunt. Laurie Ethone Gibbons, his local agent and his close aide, Brian Binley, flatly disbelieved the claims. That doesn't mean they're not true. Out of curiosity, I did once ask his then closest friend, female friend, Rosemary Wolfe, about his private life. She simply said he has none. Campbell even rejects the story of the bedside picture of his friend Kay Raven. Nothing should detract from the awfulness of child sex abuse and the impact it can have on its victims. Accusers can always be accused of fantasy or malice, but the case against Heath rests on 2 allegations from questionable sources, unsupported by any evidence of his sexual proclivities over 60 years of adult life, for most of which he was monitored around the clock by police close protection. And I've spoken to somebody who worked on police close protection, a friend of mine, back then, and they knew what was going on. But they couldn't say anything. Well, they'd be in prison. They strike me as plain implausible. I mean, how do you think MI5 and these people get dirt on these politicians? They give them close police protection, and all these police officers are sworn to secrecy under national security. But they report back to the bosses, of course. And then you get Edward Heath signing up to the European Union when he said he wouldn't. Quite simple, really. And plausible. However loud the mob may howl, there's that word, the mob again, there is no sight of a fox. Historical sex abuse is currently the nation's favoured blood sport. Most countries apply a 10-year statute of limitation to such crimes. In Britain, the field is open indefinitely to the living and the dead. Police and BBC websites openly invite the public to name any celebrity they think might once have molested them. They will enjoy secrecy and possible compensation. Cliff Richards remains in limbo following a highly publicised police raid last summer on his Berkshire home when he was on holiday. No attempt was made to inform him or reach him about what turned out to be a 30-year-old allegation, but the BBC was allowed to film it from a helicopter. The raid was described by barrister Geoffrey Robertson as a deliberate act of defamation. Well, here's a guy who hung about with the Cray twins, and they were not nice people. And he was a good friend of Jimmy Savile's as well, as was Edward Heath, of course. Police and prisons are overwhelmed by the Home Office's obsession with sex offences. An extra 650 offenders have been jailed in the past year alone. The dead may seem safe from prosecution, but not from defamation. They are at the mercy not of the law, but of history. But police and the media still have some obligation to fairness and proportionality. The past week's assault on Heath's reputation has clearly been driven by defensiveness over Jimmy Savile and by past police neglect of sex abuse cases. It has been driven by political antipathy to Heath, by latent homophobia, and by a general suspicion of people who seem to lead abnormal lives. Perhaps one day a refutable fact against Heath does emerge. Perhaps the Goddard inquiry into establishment sex crimes will make an astonishing revelation. For the time being, night after night, a clear injustice is committed. It is sick. No, Edward Heath was sick, as was Jimmy Savile and Cyril Smith. And of course, you, Simon Jenkins, for writing this garbage. That's it for tonight, and back on Monday with Christina England, and the following Thursday with